Good morning, parents and family members, or some of you may be seeing this in the afternoon or evening. Really excited to join you again for another one of our webinar series. My name is Lynanne Yundestead, and I'm the Director of New Student and Family Programs here at Virginia Commonwealth University. And I am joined today by Dana Vandervelde, and she is joining us from University Counseling Services in our Advocacy program, and is going to be talking with us a little bit about Title IX. I know that many families who attended orientation this summer had some questions about what Title IX is, how it protects their student, and how a student might access services if they need to related to Title IX once they're here. And so Dana's going to do a great job of kind of cluing us in on all the details and providing some of those resources. So we encourage you to share this with your student and to educate yourself so that you can be a really great resource for them. And as always, we will record the entire length of this webinar, and we'll have it available on our family blog for you to refer back to as often as you might need to. And once Dana has gone through her presentation, I'll ask some questions at the end, or if any of you have questions, we'll have some time for that as well. And I'll let you know what our next webinar series is at the end of our presentation. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dana.
Thanks so much, Lynanne. So like she said, my name is Dana Vandervelde. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as a confidential advocate with University Counseling Services. And so a quick plug, I am not an official representative of Title IX. However, my job requires that I support students through a lot of Title IX processes. So I'll do my best to answer any really specific Title IX questions that I can, knowing that I'm not a full representative of that office. So really quick, if you aren't aware of what Title IX is, it is a law from 1972 that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. And so while that originally started with sports and denying women access to sports teams, it has now been expanded. And Title IX really looks at, we have a sexual misconduct policy on campus. It's a very sweeping policy that I'll go over in a few minutes. And that office is now responsible for if someone feels like they have been discriminated on based on their sex. So if they've experienced any kind of sexual misconduct, that office can then take the report, do a full investigation, and then find or report a finding. So our policy is really sweeping, and it can be really different from the Virginia state policy or the policy and the laws that are in your individual state. And so Title IX covers the following. First is sex or gender-based discrimination. So sexual harassment would fall under that. So if people feel that they've had persistent harassment that's enough to make a reasonable person feel fearful, sorry. Also, sexual assault is covered under this policy. And so we consider sexual assault to break down into two different definitions. One is non-consensual sexual penetration, and the other is just sexual contact. So again, that policy is more sweeping than some others you might see at different schools or things like that. Sexual exploitation is also another part of the policy that we cover. So that could be bullying, hazing, sexually based stalking, things like that. Our policy also covers intimate partner violence or relationship violence, and that can also include stalking within the context of a relationship. And we consider IPV or intimate partner violence to be not only physical, but it could be sexual violence, it could be financial violence, social violence, emotional violence, and things like that. Also, the final two things that are covered under our Title IX are complicity. So that's if someone knows about a sexual assault or any kind of these forms of violence that I've mentioned and does not reasonably act, they can be found complicit. And also retaliation. So a lot of times when students come forward, they're very fearful that either their abuser or the perpetrator or their friends will kind of retaliate against them. Our policy includes safety from retaliation so that students can come forward and feel like they can fully engage with the Title IX process. And then I know there are a lot of different definitions in there, but if you check out the VCU Title IX website, you can look in detail of what all of these different forms of violence include. So at VCU and within the Title IX policy, we also go ahead and define affirmative consent. And so at VCU, we don't believe that consent is the absence of a no, but the presence of a yes. And not only a verbal yes, but an informed yes. So people should be able to know exactly what they are agreeing to, and that consent can kind of change throughout, and so it has to be informed every step of the way. Just because someone says yes to a kiss does not mean they're saying yes to something more than that. Consent has to be informed, and they have to know what they're giving consent to throughout the process. It's enthusiastic, so we really put this in some of our educational materials because we want students to know that you shouldn't just be looking for like a timid yes, you should be looking for an excited yes. So even if that's just asking someone for a hug, hopefully they're going to open their arms and be really excited for that. And if they're not, maybe that's a sign that they're not interested in getting a hug. It has to be voluntary, so it cannot be coerced, whether that be through pressure, through drugs and alcohol, threats, anything like that. It has to be something that is absolutely voluntary, and again, that person is knowing what they're agreeing to and excited about it. It has to be active. So again, it's something that we check in throughout an entire process. So what I mean by that is if someone said yes to a kiss on Monday, it doesn't mean that they're also consenting to a kiss Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So it's an active process. It's an active negotiation between two or more people. Our policy also includes through demonstration of clear words or actions. We know consent isn't always a direct question and a direct answer, so it should be a combination of words such as like, yes, I like that, please keep going, let's take this somewhere else, and actions. So we want to make sure that, again, people are enthusiastic, they're excited about what's going to happen, and they are knowingly walking into this situation. And then finally, that which kind of goes along with the active part, consent can be withdrawn at any time. If someone is in the middle of an act, whether it be a kiss or some kind of physical interaction, at any point in time, they can say, stop, I don't want to do this anymore, and the other person should respect that answer, and if not, we are then into kind of sexual assault territory, which I know we all really want to avoid. So the university also has an amnesty policy, and so this is a drug and alcohol amnesty policy that exists to basically encourage folks to come forward and report and potentially follow through with an investigation if something has happened to them. So in my line of work, this is a really, really important policy because it allows students to be completely honest with us about what happened, which means that we can help them in the best way possible. And they don't have to be fearful that if they were smoking or using illicit drugs or drinking underage, that we are going to punish them for that. So this is, from my standpoint as an advocate, a really, really wonderful policy because it allows students to sit back and be honest about what happened. And so the final part about Title IX, before I get more into what I do and how I support students through a Title IX process, is how we report. And so you can report in a couple different ways. If you go to equity.vcu.edu, they actually have a form there, the sexual misconduct reporting form, and students or staff or anyone, I sometimes fill out these forms for students, can just in as much detail as they're willing to share, kind of talk about what happened to them. After that report is made, someone from Title IX would then contact that student, let them know about resources available, including my office, which is a confidential office, and ask them to come in and talk a little bit more about their experience. You can also call Title IX. They'll probably just route you right back to that reporting form. But in the case of an emergency, VCU PD can also respond and help that student kind of figure out what the best case I'm going to stop right there, Linan. I'm going to start over. In the case of emergencies, VCU police can also assist with students. So while a police investigation and a Title IX investigation are two completely different processes, VCU PD are also equipped to respond and support students and get them connected with an advocate or a community resource. So their number is 804-828-1234. So it's really easy to remember. I encourage all students to just put it in their phone. I have it in my phone just in case anything happens. So I'm going to get a little bit into more of what I do. Like I mentioned earlier, I am not an investigator or a Title IX coordinator, but I actually serve as a confidential advocate. And so I'll actually move forward one slide and then go back. So we provide confidential, non-therapeutic support for students who identify as survivors of sexual assault, intimate partner violence, stalking, and harassment. So students can come to us, sit down in our office with either with myself or with Tamika, there's only two of us, and talk about what happened to them, and we are not obligated to make a report. This is really, really important. We're very trauma informed, so we try to meet students where they are and then talk with them about their options. So some students come in and they only want academic accommodations, and then we support them as best we can in making sure that they are able to fully engage with their education. We have some students who come in who know that they want to report, who want us to call the police or Title IX right in that minute, and we can support them throughout that entire process. So some of the different things we do are those accommodations. We help students make reports. We also just help with other resources. So if students need therapeutic support, we can just walk them right up to the front desk at University Counseling Services. If they'd rather go somewhere off campus and receive more long-term support, we have memorandums of understanding with different organizations in the community to get them hooked up with. And then we can also accompany students to those resources. So I will go to court with students. Tamika and I have been to the hospital with students. So our job is to kind of inform them of their rights, support them in engaging with those resources, and then accompany them and make it as easy as possible for them to access those resources. And then finally, we also are responsible for violence prevention on campus, and I'll get into that in just one moment. So it's really, really important that we take a second and talk about the difference between Title IX and advocacy, because a lot of people get them really confused, and we're two completely different offices. So Title IX is the reporting entity, like I mentioned before. They are not confidential, and so what that means is if you go to them with a situation, they're obligated to take that report. And while most of the time they'll respect a student's wishes and whether or not they want to move forward with a formal investigation, the office could move forward without that student's consent. And so that's a really important thing to point out, because on the advocacy side, students can come in and talk to us. They do not have to be engaged in the Title IX process or a police process to work with us. We don't pressure them to report because we know students have really good reasons for not wanting to make reports. We know sometimes they just don't want to report. They don't want to engage with those services, and that's okay. We are confidential, like I mentioned. The only time I have to break confidentiality is if the student tells me that they have thoughts of hurting themselves or hurting someone else, and then I just walk them up to the front desk of University Counseling Services, and they get seen usually like within a half hour, if not even faster than that. And we just make sure that they're safe, that people around them are safe before we kind of continue with this advocacy process. Also, Title IX is a neutral party, so they do not take the side of perpetrators or respondents or the complainant or the survivor. On my hand, I can take the side of the survivor. I can fully be engaged and support the survivor. We do not support respondents. The Dean of Students' office can support respondents in that process. So we can advise students and support students, and again, go with them to these really kind of stressful and sometimes re-traumatizing meetings and make it as comfortable for them as possible, and also advocate for them so that they're treated well. Title IX investigates and then comes up with a finding, while we can just help students through that process. We are not involved in the investigation. We're not called as witnesses. We're really just there to support students through that process, answer any questions that they have, talk to Title IX on their behalf if they ask us to, and things like that. The one thing that we have in common is both offices can assist with accommodations. So if a student's not involved with the Title IX process, they just kind of want some support for their classes, we write letters of support for students. So does Title IX, basically just asking professors if they can provide some flexibility. These aren't the same kinds of accommodations that SAO or the Student Accessibility and Educational Opportunity Office would provide, but they're letters that just say the student has had a situation that's confidential, and we would just appreciate some flexibility and understanding and seeing what we can do to make sure that student is fully engaged in their class. 9 times out of 10, professors are really responsive to that and want to help their students succeed, which is really wonderful. And so while we are starting to do some education in the community, we're trying to do more community outreach, we're really trying to move the needle from purely response to prevention. There are lots of ways that students can get involved with us. And so the first is that students can request a presentation from us. And so we go into classrooms, we go into clubs, to residence halls, and try to make our information as accessible as possible. And we try not to just talk about how to keep yourself safe, because while that's important, that's not the same thing as prevention. We want to talk about healthy relationships, what gender violence is, how to get consent, right? We do workshops where we talk about consent is almost the same thing as ordering a pizza, right? You do those negotiations with someone else while you're ordering a pizza, or you want to borrow your parents' car. A lot of these conversations are happening naturally, and we try to then tie that into the work that we're doing to prevent violence. Also, how to support survivors. So sometimes well, not sometimes, we know that violence is happening on campus, unfortunately. And we know a lot of students go to their friends, to their RAs, to their professors. So we try to develop workshops all about, okay, so this has happened. How can we then support survivors, mitigate any more harm from happening, and get them connected to the right resources on campus? And then finally, we like to talk about healthy relationships. We get students really excited and really involved in talking about how to be a great partner, how to know what to look for if you're starting to date in college. And so these are just a small handful of some of the workshops we offer. We also encourage students to co-sponsor an event with us. We have lots of different awareness months throughout the year, and we love to partner. Again, we're a staff of 2, so it's hard for us to constantly be present in the community, but we partner with different RAs, we partner with fraternity and sorority life and with athletics, and try to put on events that are relatable and fun, while also kind of still hitting at those core things that we know prevent or at least kind of intervene in sexual and domestic violence. We also will just attend events with students. I had a student group come to me the other day that's like, we really want to run this event. Would you come and just kind of keep an eye out, answer any maybe big questions that happen, but just kind of come and support us. And if we're available, we're more than happy to come and support students. And then finally, we have our own groups of students that we work with. So while we're in the University Counseling Center, we also work with the Wellness Resource Center, or I think they changed their name, so the WELL, and we work with their peer health educators. We have a group of students who's completely dedicated to doing violence prevention work. And so we recruit for those students every semester. They get hands-on programming experience, they get training in violence prevention, then they're also cross-trained in mental health, alcohol and other drugs, and sexual health. So they can put on these holistic and again, really relatable and exciting events. And then finally, this semester, we've been piloting a violence prevention committee, which gets a group of about 10 students at a table with the advocates to talk about what are the bigger attitudinal changes we need to see on campus, whether that be in student groups, at a higher administration level. So that is just up and running as of this week, which we're really, really excited about. And so there are a couple different ways that students or parents can contact us. So you can either use the main university counseling line, which is 804-828-6200. That'll get you right to our front desk. You can just ask to speak with an advocate, and if we're available, we'll either talk to you right then, or we'll just take a message and give you a call back. We also have a confidential email that only Tamika and myself have access to, which is myoptions@vcu.edu. We make a lot of appointments that way with students. We answer a lot of questions, so please feel free to reach out to us that way. The only kind of caveat I have is that if a student is working with us and a parent or a friend calls under FERPA and under our confidentiality, I can't ever confirm or deny if we're working with a student. However, I'm more than happy to kind of talk through hypotheticals with parents or friends, or if I have the student's permission, I'm more than happy to talk and kind of fill in parents or friends about what's going on, what does the process look like, and any other questions that might come up. And then also we like to include, if you look at the slide in the bottom left, you'll see the One Call, One Community hotline. This is a 24/7 hotline that's run through various sexual and domestic violence agencies in our community. That's 24/7. So my office hours are 8 to 5. So if a student has experienced violence outside of those hours or is just needing some support over winter break, for example, they can always call this number, 804-612-6126, and get support, whether that be counseling support, case management, safe housing, things like that. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that I have the LGBTQ partner abuse and sexual assault helpline. That's open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. for our LGBTQIA+ identified students to use at their leisure. And then finally, if students just need a place to kind of fully process what's happened to them and actually need therapeutic support, we're with University Counseling Services. We have a great staff of psychotherapists that can meet with students. And so all of us are located in the second floor of the Student Commons in Suite 238, which is right above the Chick-fil-A on the second floor. And you can reach out to us in that same number, 804-828-6200, and set up an appointment, or even just call and figure out, is it more appropriate to meet with a confidential advocate or with a therapist, and we can help you get sorted out. And then both of our offices, both advocacy and counseling, will meet with students on the MCV campus as well. There are therapists that are down at MCV full-time, and then Tamika and I will go down by request and are usually there at least once a week to do programming and to work with students on the MCV campus. So that is my final slide, and so I will kind of push it back to Linan to see if we have any questions.
Thank you so much, Dana. All right, so I do have a couple of questions for you. I think the first question that I have is one that I know I've gotten a couple of emails about from family members. So I've received an email from a family member before that talked about how they were concerned that a student might be stalking or that someone might be stalking their student.
Okay.
And it seems to me what I hear about more often than not is that they feel like that person may be utilizing social media or other means to kind of figure out their student's schedule, or to just ask constant questions about where they are. And they might not be in a relationship. It might not be necessarily any kind of partner violence, but certainly unwelcomed behavior. What would be your suggestion as to a way a student should handle that situation?
Sure. So stalking is one of the more complicated and also really, really scary forms of violence that we see on campus. And so my first thing is that if it's within an intimate partner relationship, whether it be an ex or a current partner, they can pursue Title IX. If it's not related to a partner or an ex-partner, then we would have other options that we would pursue. So my first suggestion is always to come see a confidential advocate, because we can safety plan with students. And so a lot of times we can kind of look at what the settings of their phone look like or their Facebook. We can also see if we can get some of their classes moved around. And so we are able to kind of holistically work with students and see like, what can we do to like keep you safe in this moment, and then also talk about reporting options. We have a really great relationship with VCU PD. They have the You Have Options program, which is where officers are trained in how to work with survivors of all of these different forms of violence that I've mentioned, including stalking. And so they are also a great resource. But if students aren't really sure if they want to navigate those processes quite yet, we always encourage students to keep a log. You can just Google stalking log, and that's kind of the easiest way to get started. All it takes is for you to tell someone one time, leave me alone. And if they continue to persist and contact you, that is considered stalking. If it makes you feel fearful, if it's a pattern. So we ask students to just start writing it down. That way, if you do decide in the future to make a report, you already have all of that information. Always keep screenshots if you can. Go ahead and block that person if you can, and whatever else is going to make you feel safe. There's also safety plans that you can look up online if you don't want to talk to an advocate, and work through by yourself as well.
Thank you so much. Kind of along the same lines, I've heard some students using terminology or phrases around stalking that kind of seem to romanticize the idea of stalking. And I think some of the shows that we've seen come out recently, especially the You Show on Netflix,
Yes.
kind of adds
Yes.
what looks like an endearing quality to stalking. What are some things a parent or a family member might say to their student to help them realize that using terminology like, oh, Facebook stalking someone or Instagram stalking someone, or that some of the things that they might see in those shows are actually not romantic behaviors? What tips might you have for a parent or family member trying to have that conversation with their student?
Yeah, I always start with asking people what they mean. So when someone, and I do this all the time where I like stop people like mid-sentence when they say, I Facebook stalked you. And I'm like, well, what did you mean by that? And they're like, oh, I was just like looking at your Facebook. And I was like, well, did you know what the actual definition of stalking is? Or have you ever known someone who has been stalked before?
Mm-hmm.
And while that seems kind of like at first they kind of are like, what are you talking about? I try to sit down and like show them the definition, which is a repeated, unwanted pattern of like contact that makes a person feel fearful. I'm like, are you trying to make me feel fearful by looking at my Facebook? No, right? So that's not an appropriate use of that word. So actually looking up definitions, while it seems kind of weird, can be really helpful in facilitating that conversation. Also, there are a lot of like graphics online that you can find to look at kind of like the hierarchy of gender violence, or in this case, the hierarchy of stalking. And it's literally a triangle. I wish I could pull it up right now. And it shows how like, if stalking is the worst behavior, that's at the top of the triangle. It kind of starts to break down level by level the attitudes and the language that then support stalking. So when people use any problematic language, even past stalking, I will literally pull up that picture and be like, the very base of this triangle is jokes and language that support stalking as something that's normal. And that can be a really good way of starting conversation, because you can see it starts with jokes and then it kind of moves up and up to actual stalking behaviors. And I think a lot of people don't realize that connection between their thoughts or their words and the actual structures that would then support things like stalking or gender violence. And so there's also, my final thought on that, we actually just did a program about this with students, which was really awesome and really effective. If you look up SPARC, it's SPARC, I can't remember what it stands for right now, but it's like SPARC Stalking Resource Center. They actually have worksheets that you can do, or like it has a discussion guidelines from you that points out the difference between like Joe's stalking behavior and what would actually be considered like romantic and sweet. What's the line between someone being persistent and then someone crossing the line into actually stalking you? So I always encourage people to use their online resources or talk to someone like an advocate who can kind of walk you through that conversation.
Great. And then I have one final question for you. So if a parent or family member is made aware of a situation that could potentially be a violation of Title IX, there's something going on with their student that their student discloses to them, or even maybe something that their student discloses to them about something a roommate or a friend is experiencing. If a parent or family member wanted to report that, to potentially get that student access to some resources, how might they do that?
So this can be a really tricky question. And so what we as confidential advocates would suggest is going to be very different from what Title IX or another administrator may suggest. So I want to start right there. If someone is experiencing any form of gender violence, they have lost a bit of power and control. So as advocates, we try to do our best to give as much power and control back to students. That's why if you go through my job title, it's all about like giving a lot of support, but never ever making a decision for the student, never pushing the student to make a decision that they're not ready to make. My recommendation would be to get them connected to a confidential resource first, if you can, because then they can walk through what are the things that are stopping them from making a report? What are the things that are affecting their mental health? And they can get wraparound services without being forced to make a report. What we know a lot of times, if students or parents make a report without that person's consent, we're then violating their trust in a whole nother manner. And so that's my recommendation, is like talking with that student one-on-one, and trying to get them connected to a confidential resource first, whether it be student health or counseling or advocacy. However, if parents or friends do decide that they're going to make a report, and we tell this to all mandated reporters as well, you need to tell the person that a report is being made. That clues them in. It gives them a chance to react before they see that email, because we know what happens is the student gets an email from Title IX basically saying that they've received a report. Here are a bunch of resources, which is wonderful, and to please contact us if you'd like to move forward. Students aren't obligated to move forward with that process when they get the email. They can completely ignore it if they want to. What we know happens a lot of times is when they get that email, it's very scary, it's very shocking. People think Title IX is like the big bad wolf on campus, when really they're trying to support students. And we know that a lot of times they recoil and don't engage in those services because they had a violation of trust. And so if you do choose to make a report, check in with that student, let them know why you're making that decision, why you feel like it's in their best interest, but also know that just because they get that email, it doesn't mean that they're going to engage in those resources. So I always tell people, know what your confidential resources are, also know what the off-campus resources are to support students, so they have places to go without being forced to make a report right off the bat. And that's going to be a different answer than Title IX would give you, just to put that out there. They want to know because they want to hold people accountable for wrongdoing on campus.
Sure, of course. Well, thank you again so much, Dana, for spending some time with us. Families, if you are excited to check in with our next webinar, I'm going to let you know a little bit of information about that. The next webinar is going to be on March 3rd at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And that webinar's topic is called Making It Real, Understanding VCU's Approach to Learning. And so if you are not familiar, REAL is an acronym, but also sort of a motto at VCU. We talk about making it real, and you'll see that on a lot of billboards and promotional items and materials that the university puts out. But REAL is actually an acronym that stands for Relevant, Experiential, and Applied Learning. And it is our commitment at VCU to provide an educational experience that does have those aspects to it, that is relevant, that's experiential, and that is applied learning for our students. And so we're going to be joined by one of our colleagues who is working very hard on real initiatives, who's going to talk about how students can engage in opportunities to do that meaningful learning, whether it's hands-on research or scholarship or, excuse me, internships or things like that. So I hope that you will consider joining us. Again, that is going to be on March 3rd at 11 a.m. And as always, we'll record and make it available if you're not able to join us live. But again, I want to thank Dana so much for being with us today. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Thanks.